Hello, everyone. Welcome to our ASBX presentation on art institutions and healthy communities office. I'm Annalea Beattie, and I'd like to begin this talk by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work. I pay my respects and give thanks to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and I acknowledge that this land has never been ceded. Okay. So I'm an artist who's interested in using art as a methodology for thinking about how we might live in the future on planets like Mars. So how the experiences of art making might psychologically and physically invigorate us in hostile environments in long-term space duration, encouraging us to prosper and grow in a healthy way. So this last year, like most people, I stayed at home and I spent a lot of time trying to think practically about how we might ensure that art and artists have a place in our new communities of Earth, how art might contribute to build rich cultures and keep us healthy and well in space. In some ways, it seems like the institutions of art is a strange topic for a space health symposium, but if we agree that art is important in building our social freedom, and that social freedom in turn is essential for our mental and physical health, then talking about the role of institutions of art in relation to developing healthy societies seems a useful thing to do. So we know that in the early days of our habitat on Mars, our small group will be confined by the lethal environment. There'll be a lack of physical space inside, restricted resources, and a utilitarian routine that keeps our daily systems functioning so we can stay alive. Because of the danger, there'll be necessary surveillance and coercive controls on the way we live. Our home in space will be a disciplinary site and an environment of enclosure. Our communities will be social experiments. My belief is that on other planets, it will be creative work of any kind that keeps our will to imagine alive. Art making offers us both immediacy and slow contemplation through the material and sensory. It addresses our need for autonomy and agency, and encourages us to perform, to be curious, to take risks, and to connect with others through art making. We explore other realities and other modes of resistance. Art making promotes all different kinds of vernaculars, and it stimulates us to love and care for others. And through art, we can fail or dissent. We can reinvent ourselves. In art making, there's always that potential and capacity for change. So the institutions of art are at the intersection of art and its public, not everywhere, but in many, many countries on Earth, we rely on these cultural and educational bodies to mediate between art and people, perpetuating specific modes of cultural constructions. Our global art institutions emerge from Western Europe and North American traditions, from an imperial world of forced migration and stolen artifacts. In constant pursuit of the new, imperial conditions are reproduced through the dominance of Western art, as its institutions continually expand into different territories, writing and rewriting both the subjects and objects of art into systems of knowledge and power. As part of our work as artists, we question the context of art practice, which includes the nature of our institutions and the genealogies of values they present. For instance, we recognise that the strategies and practices of art institutions and their mix of historical and cultural narratives give rise to particular kinds of communalities. Art institutions themselves suggest that these are in some way inherent in art objects. Exhibitions are presented, for example, as if collections have qualities that are intrinsically tied to specific periods or categories. Art institutions like the Art Museum generate borders through their engagement with the public. And these borders shape societal and cultural norms by attempting to define what art is. Yet, while artists are directly responsible for everything we make, art institutions on Earth do not always share this responsibility. The museum, for instance, makes a choice when it gives authority and accumulation, when it gives authority to the accumulation and exploitation of the past, rather than the ongoing reality of a shared social world. It performs a democratic role as it categorises, classifies and catalogues collections and displays them. It selects the context in which objects can be read and circumvents histories and discourses that are perceived to hamper reception. At the heart of the politics of the museum, the collection is classified within artificially constructive discursive fields such as community or nation, or perhaps within specific historical periods, or as categories found within Western art history. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the museum aims to construct the communities it addresses, and this is the capacity of our art institutions, to assume a public through cultural display and then to constitute it from within. So every mediation establishes a border or delimitation. So in the past few decades, revisionist scholarship has reinvented art institutions, and this is an important shift when we think about our healthy community off Earth. As we now know that the representations of our art institutions in any context are never neutral or silent. Art institutions today combine self-critique with outside debate, accounting for the relationship between the gallery program and its institutional reality. Public programs emphasise art projects that are participatory and process-orientated, for instance, through the practices of installation, debate, and workshops and performance, to reconceptualise their ideas of a cultural public sphere by highlighting multiple publics, common spaces and democratic principles. Opportunities are provided for the public to negotiate and confront pressing social questions, and to attend to the social role of art, to connect the political relevance of art to wider society. Art institutions today propose directions that centre upon consultation and co-production in the experiences of art rather than its objects. So what this means is we've moved away from the primacy of the exhibition, from the traditional white cube, from the endless shuffling and reshuffling of the permanent collection, and the easy framing of autonomous art objects. Our focus becomes participation and social engagement rather than authorship and ownership. It's good for art and society that the politics of art institutions are now under scrutiny, and that they themselves are willing to address institutional critique. And this is the necessary background for us when we think about what kind of institutions we might need on Mars. So none of us have travelled to Mars, and we don't know what it's going to be like. I've mentioned that to think about what it might be like to live and work as an artist and what art might be like on other planets. In my practice, I've sought to locate making art in places where it usually has little or no role, in simulated and extreme environments on Earth that are analogous to conditions that might be found on Mars. So what I've learned really is that art in an extraterrestrial setting begins on a small community-based scale. When I think about the institutions of art, I suggest that the archive and the art school are appropriate as starting points for thinking about community and cultural growth. So the archive, in terms of the art archive, It's useful for us that the roles and functions of the archive are much theorised. The spatial and temporal history of the archive is in fact violent and privileged. As author and curator Ariella Aisha Azule writes, engagement with the archive was made a form of discipline that provides proof of the imperial citizen's identity, that is, one's place in the imperial world. The contingent nature of the archive shapes history and memory and is itself shaped by political, social, and technological powers. In art, in its broadest sense, the use of the art archive is as a literal and detailed store of documents. Art movements such as land art and conceptual art relied on documentation of art as their work might be site-specific or ephemeral or temporary or durational. In the case of land art, the art might cease to exist altogether. Or performance art, for instance, might depend entirely on archival institutions where the video, the photograph becomes the artwork. Since the 60s, archival material has been widely employed as a part of artistic method and is used in exhibition practices in the field of art. So focusing on agency and materiality of the archival document, artists, curators, museums, and biennale directors have used the archive as a theme, not only for institutional critique, to rewrite the past or represent challenges or particular discourses, but to incorporate archival material as the material remains of performance, to make new works, in other words. Here we have the fictional archive of Zoe Leonard, where the artist takes on the role of historian, investigating the ethnographic conditions of the archive itself by creating a fictional life archive of an imaginary Black Hollywood actress. Or Felix Gonzalez Torres, as he documents gun deaths committed in the USA in 1 week. How we might experience the art archive in an enclosed, monotonous, routine-driven environment where art making is challenging and not a priority is worth considering. We're aware how the archive can frame and impose meaning on our bodies and our objects and cultures, changing the way we view art and ourselves. Even though archivists aspire to a democratic facilitation in that they aim to give each person a similar experience of what you might find in an archive, the art archive is not a place where actual historical or creative knowledge is produced. Archival elements are inconclusive. The archive is what we make of it. Our singular performative encounter with the art archive is what produces our experience. So on Mars, our priority for the extraterrestrial art archive will be its degree of integration into our small community. What this means is the development of a clear plan, one that involves an institutional infrastructure which is both subcritical and emancipatory. Our extraterrestrial art archive needs to be not only adaptable and responsive to social criticism and the collective imaginary, it must rely on the slow and long-term process of building an interface between an emerging archival framework and the internal and external social dynamics, which evolve as our multidisciplinary extraterrestrial community evolves, like all archives. Because the art archive is a discursive domain which has the advantage of being able to accommodate many voices, it can be constructed by a community through transdisciplinary and collaborative practices emerging from the social realities of every day. Beyond the boundaries of particular fields, participation, ownership, and access are key to creating an art archive which will truly belong to the social space. How this assembly comes together is of most significance. It is here that the concept of the art school is useful in developing open and debatable models. So on Earth, art schools are very healthy places. They're messy, experimental, interdisciplinary, both improvised and rigorous, transparent, non-profitable, inclusive, non-hierarchical, and invested in community engagement. In today's art school, the artist or the art collective is decentered as author. to engage audiences spontaneously and directly. Art students quickly learn to make their own pathways as cultural producers. They leave behind monuments and temples of art to work with overlapping and multiple temporalities, rather than single strands of history spoke in the name of institutionalized power. On Mars, the art studio is primarily where art making will begin. Our extraterrestrial art school must take account of complex conditions, not the least being small shared spaces, few materials, and constant surveillance. A working art school will need eventually workshops, libraries, exhibitions, performance spaces, outreach, and organisation. However, art schools and art making, as curator Charles Esch famously writes, can start with a table. So in an extraterrestrial space habitat, whatever physical form it takes, the art school studio will be an exploratory place for reflexive, self-directed and collaborative art practice as it is on Earth. In space, it offers the rare opportunity for failure in a low-stake environment. In the studio, anomalies, mistakes, ineptitude, amateurism and a lack of skill holds as much critical promise as established sets of technical skills or traditional frames of reference for art making. Recognising art as a sphere where challenges take place as part of our everyday lives through exchange and through attention to failure, defeat, conflict and problem solving, art establishes its own criteria for how it should be viewed. Not subject or object, but the experiences of making art, that embodied and sensate practicing of art making itself, its play, its struggle to bring about change, that belief in an advocacy of art making is one of the most important contributions that the extraterrestrial art school can make to the challenges faced by our lonely micro society living off Earth. In terms of the art archive, relationships between the art school and the concept of the archive are already well understood. The archive is an institutionalized device in the art school and a methodology, one that is established as part of art practice. As art students self-organise, they gather, collect, select, index and document, and then they archive their material exploration to direct and develop future artwork. As they enrich their practice with speculative propositions that connect them to other disciplines, in their archival practices, they attend to not only encounter where the artwork is made, but not only the moment when it's made, but before and afterwards, by acknowledging shared rights and by making sure the art archive is not only limited to activities defined by certain areas of speciality. Art students will insist the art archive is a truly democratic space for interrogation and discussion. As art institutions are part of our cultural identity and part of our shared political existence, they're part in understanding the complexities of a healthy extraterrestrial democracy. It's crucial. Institutions of art will support artists to take up their own place in a new culture on other planets, ensuring art is not relegated to therapy or leisure or entertainment. However we choose to think about art institutions in future societies, however we frame the exchanges that occur between artist and exhibition, the public and the gallery, within the museum with its educational and pedagogical formats, however we understand the transition from student to practitioner in the art school or engage with the critical role of the archive, whatever our position is on the demands of the marketplace and its collectors or the domain of public art, its shrines and memorials and monuments, the ways in which we envision art will influence our well-being and that of our new society of Earth. On Mars, we'll need a common world to care for, one that is simply not resource driven in terms of its people and objects, and one that pertains to more than the division of rights in a differential body politic in the future on other planets. Yes, we will need all the institutions of art, but in the first few years of our new home off Earth, we will put into place appropriate ethical infrastructures that recognise and fund artists and distribute their work. In tandem, the art school and the art archive have the potential to lead the way for other institutions to follow, realising that material practices are about our rights made present. These institutions will help us narrate different ways of being together, contributing to our health and our democracy. Maintaining the vigour of a socially cohesive culture through art making will be juxtaposed with our commitment to institutional inclusivity. Art and artists can create democratic conditions for us to question what it means to be a citizen on Mars. If we are committed to a sense of belonging, to building robust, healthy cultural democracies on Mars, rather than a homage to earthly values, we must rethink our habitual selves, our collective cultural heritage, and the institutions of art. So thanks for listening, everyone. And I'm happy to take any questions.